to look at John chapter 3. In John chapter 3, I'm looking at the clock and I'm going to be finished around 1 o'clock. It's about 15 till. So I want to take a few moments to bring some scriptures here. John 3, Jesus speaking to Nicodemus at night. I want to point out something here concerning Christ's conversation with Nicodemus. You know, it's interesting. You see on the marquees, the building, the cars, you're driving around, you see that passage of scripture, John 3:16, for God so loved the world. A lot of people know that passage. They know how to quote it, but there's a lot more behind that than just looking at those words saying, for God so loved the world. A lot of people don't even know what that means. I didn't know what it means until I got to looking at it and really studying it. You know, it's interesting when it said God, when Jesus said God so loved the world, mainly people are thinking about this world right now in this time, on this side of the cross. But you know, there were two worlds. There were two worlds. So don't get ahead of me, because I'm going to explain to you what I'm saying. But first I want to go to John 3, where Jesus was talking to Nicodemus. And you know, when Jesus said this, he said this only to Nicodemus. He said in verse 16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. That believe in him is talking about whoever obeys him. Not just saying, Lord, I believe in you. You have to do more than that. Whoever obeys him will have everlasting life. They will not perish. And that's what Jesus was pointing out. But notice verse 17. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. You know what's interesting? God did not send Christ into the world to condemn the world. The world was already condemned. Now just think about this. The world that then was, in Peter, it talks about it in Peter, the world that then was, talking about the flood. The world that then was the flood, and then it's talking about this world, because there was another world before this world. God so loved the world, he loved everybody, that the world through him might be saved. The world was already condemned because of the way mankind acted. That's the reason Jesus came, that he may save a world that was already in condemnation. Because it says in Romans chapter 3, it said, for God said, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. A lot of time we tend to leave out the Old Testament people when we talk about the world. But the Old Testament people were also included in the world. And I talked about that this morning in class, how Christ came to shed his blood that he may redeem those who were under the first covenant. So that's what Jesus meant when he said, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. I want you to look at Galatians. In Galatians chapter 4. In Galatians chapter 4, this goes along with what Jesus is saying. In Galatians chapter 4 and verse 4, here's what Paul pointed out to the Galatian brethren. But when the fullness of the time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law. Talking about the Old Testament law. Born under the law to redeem those who were under the law, that we might receive the adoption as sons. So why did Jesus come? He came not just that he could save us on this side of the cross, but he came that he may redeem those that are on the other side of the cross. The people that live on the other side of the cross, the saints that lived on the other side of the cross, they obeyed God. They did what God ordered them to do. They did what God commanded them to do. And therefore, when they did what God commanded them to do, God was pleased with their obedience. But God was not pleased with the blood of animals, because the blood of animals could not bring man into a full relationship with God. There's only one blood that could bring man into a full relationship with God. That's the blood of animals. I want you to notice in Hebrews chapter 10, I really like looking at Hebrews, the book of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews elevates Christ. The book of Hebrews gives strength to Christ over the blood of animals. They give you a background setting of this. The people the Christians in the book of Hebrews that the Hebrew writer was writing to, he was writing to the Christians about the saints that lived way before they lived on the other side of the cross. And those saints that lived on the other side of the cross, they obeyed God, but they were doing it under the blood of the animal as commanded by God. So by them doing this as commanded by God, God was pleased with what they did. But God was not pleased with the blood of animals, because the blood of animals could not bring them into a full relationship with God. Look at Hebrews chapter 10, verse 1. For the law having a shadow of the good things to come, and not the very image of the things, can never with these same sacrifices, which they offer continually year by year, make those who approach perfect. So the writer of Hebrews was writing to the saints, encouraging them, don't go back to that old law. Because you're going back to the old law, you're going back to something that cannot bring you into a full relationship with God. But to say it plainly, these people were already in a relationship with God, and God was warning them, don't leave this relationship that you have with me. Do not go back to the old way. Notice verse 2. For then they will not have ceased to be offered. For the worshipers, once purified, will have had no more consciousness of sins. But in those sacrifices, there is a reminder of sins every year. For it is not possible that the blood of bulls and goats could take away sins. So he's laying all of this out to them, telling them that the blood of bulls and goats is not superior to the blood of Christ. Now, notice how he goes into verse 5. He's getting ready to introduce a conversation between God and Christ in the Godhead. Notice how he introduced this. Therefore, when he came into the world, he, being Christ, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. I want to say this here. Jesus came into the world not kicking and screaming and saying, I don't want to go. He came willingly. Notice this. Therefore, when he came into the world, that's Christ, he said, colon. Now that colon indicates that this is getting ready to introduce the person who's getting ready to do the talking. Notice what Jesus said. Sacrifice and offering you did not desire. God did not desire the offering of the animals, of the blood of bulls and goats, but a body you have prepared for me. When did God prepare this body for Christ? He talked about the body that he occupied. At what point did he prepare this body? He prepared this body long before man was created. God prepared this body for Christ, the scheme of redemption, before time even came into existence. That tells you the foreknowledge of God. God prepared this body for Christ, and Christ saying, you prepared this body for me. Now, when Christ came into the world, Christ did not just come into the body to be like man. He became man. He actually became man. So he came into this body and he really became man. That's why he was able to offer himself up as a perfect sacrifice. Notice how it reads in verse 6. In burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin, you had no pleasure. Why is it that God had no pleasure in the burnt offering sacrifices? Because the blood of animals could not do what God wanted to be done. Notice how it reads. Then I said, behold, I have come. This is Christ saying this here. To do your will, O God. He said, behold, I have come. In the volume of the book, it is written of me. Now, isn't that interesting? In the volume of the book, in Psalm, it is written of Christ. He said, I'm coming to do your will. What is God's will? God's will is that we all would be saved. But all will not be saved because all did not obey. And all are not obeying God. But notice how Jesus kept word. Notice how it words in this verse 8. Previously saying, sacrifice and offering, burnt offerings and offerings for sin, you did not desire, nor had pleasure in them, which are offered according to the law. So the sacrifices of animals could not bring man into a relationship with God. Then he said, behold, I have come to do your will, O God. He takes away the first, that he may establish the second. Then verse 10, by that will we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. That sanctified means that we are set aside for God. So the only way we could be sanctified is through the blood of Christ. The blood of animals could not do it. So God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. That's the reason he gave his only begotten son, that we may come back to God. When you go back to the book of Genesis, it all started in the Garden of Eden. When Adam and Eve disobeyed God, and they disobeyed God, and they ate of the fruit of the tree that God forbid them to eat of. Somebody said, well, why did God put that tree there if he didn't want them to eat it? That's God's business. We can't get into God's business. We don't question why God did what God did. All we do is accept what God says. So it all started in the Garden of Eden when they separated themselves from God and they ceased to be in a relationship with God. That's when God challenged the devil. That's the reason God told the devil, a seed is coming. And that seed is coming of a woman. And that seed is going to bruise your head. And talking about the coming of Christ. That's the first instance concerning the coming of Christ when God told the devil. He said, Christ is coming. He unfolded his scheme of redemption. And now, since man has done what he's done, and man is in this situation, we're in this situation because of Adam and Eve. And God came to rectify that situation. He came that man might obey God and come in contact with the blood of Christ so that man's sins may be forgiven. Those of you who are sitting here right now, you can count your blessing that you have come in contact with the blood of Christ. I can count my blessing that I've come in contact with the blood of Christ. How do I know that I'm in a relationship with God? It's because I have obeyed him and I'm doing what he tells me. It's only because of this book right here that we can go by and say, now I know I'm in a relationship with God. I live for God. I want to live with him. So therefore, one day when Christ returns, he's going to return to claim those who have obeyed the gospel and take them home with him. And that's the good thing right there. And so that's what we can look at and we can be happy about. So if you're here this evening and you would like to ask for forgiveness, ask for encouragement, and you would like for someone to talk to you about the scripture so you can know what you need to do to be saved, that's why we're here. So if you're subject to the invitation, we're going to get ready to stand to sing the song of encouragement. Will you please come while we sing the song of encouragement?